Living in the deep, lush city of Portland, Oregon, buildings peek out from towering evergreens. Drawbridges cascade over the river, bringing cars and bikes to and from the city center. One of the largest hospitals sits perched on the hillside, overlooking it all. Oregon Health and Science University is where, during her schooling, a nurse named Marnasha found refuge in the pages of the novels she came to love.
I love to escape into books, and I've found a true love for sci-fi.
It's within the pages of these fantastical stories that she began to see characters that finally resembled the experience she lived every day.
A Black character that has similar hair texture, similar cultural identity and experiences. And in this novel, she is at a predominantly white institution. She stumbles upon this secret supernatural society in which she seems to be a part of. She's still the only Black woman and has to navigate that.
Here Marnasha was reading about a superhero, one who was Black and a woman, but also one who had to deal with the eerily similar obstacles Marnasha navigated throughout her own reality.
I still face the same kind of struggles, whether it be racism and microaggressions and having to worry about my hair on these fantastical adventures. I'm like, wow, that's me too. I feel like in this real life, like obviously reality, we go on many different adventures, but still as a Black woman, there's all of these other considerations like living and surviving while Black.
Welcome to Black Care Matters, the show where we honor the unique experiences of Black nurses working in the Pacific Northwest. I'm your host, Rashida Quinn. In recognizing that Black lives matter, it's crucial that the care for these nurses also matters. Cultural white supremacy has had a detrimental impact on the American healthcare system. Each nurse's story reveals rich insights towards the possibilities of a better future. In today's episode, Marnasha Cetz will walk us through attending nursing school during a global pandemic, how she almost walked away from the nursing profession within just a couple of months, but inevitably found her way to rewrite her future, and how her religious community provided solace for her to process living in an America wrought with white supremacy. It's a conversation that epitomizes the fact that Black care matters.
I graduated back in 2021, so about a year after the pandemic started, and that was interesting as trying to learn when health care and people's health are like in a true state of crisis.
Right.
I had really good mentors during that time.
I'm curious what led you into the nursing field.
I've always been kind of like a natural caregiver and cared for others. And so when I got to college and I found out that you could mesh, biology and science with also like the person and their mental, emotional health and like keep it holistic in that way is what really led me to nursing, because I also love psychology, right? It was super cool having exposure to that and just kind of mosey around doing prerequisite classes and finding what I'm interested in and kind of finding that intersectionality within those two fields in nursing.
So you enter nursing school. Tell me more. What developed that interest in biology and now, getting to combine that with nurturing and psychology?
Yeah. Nursing school is really hard. Shout out to anybody who, attempts to go into nursing and nursing school, and shout out to everybody who graduates, because it is not a small feat. I think in my own personal experience as a Black woman and belonging to a very large Black family who have numerous different comorbidities and things like that within it, I saw that there was a need for representation in the nursing space as well.
Yeah.
Getting there was really hard though, because I'm also a first generation college student. And so nobody else in my family went to college. And that's hard to explain the stress of not only just higher education and college and then nursing school, but also doing so at a predominantly white institution. I was one of 2 Black students in my nursing cohort of 32, which is actually really good. I was surprised that there was another Black
That you had
student.
one other person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I remember being like, wait, what? Like, this guy's here too. And he's this like tall Black man. He has like dreads. I'm like, wow, like this is awesome.
You're like, he's black.
You're like blickety blackety black. Like what? Like there's no denying it. And so that just was like a shock. So I did have, one person who could, kind of speak to the experience and see health and nursing through, a Black lens, because Black health is an absolute crisis. And I feel like I was in an environment where like we talked about the inequities between communities of color in healthcare and how nurses can lead out to bridge healthcare gaps related to that. And like we're encouraged to do that.
That's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My professors and mentors played such a vital role connecting our cohort to the NAACP, connecting our cohort to different areas of nursing where it's focusing on racial injustices. And so when thinking about the death of George Floyd and the unrest that occurred in our country in 2020, there's no way that we can't talk about this.
Were these white professors?
2 of them are white, yeah. And then one of them, she's like of Middle Eastern descent.
So it was really the choice of these leaders that bridged the gap of bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah. And these were professors, and I didn't learn this till later after I graduated, but they were using unpaid time. And we did like book clubs and talked more about how to be involved in injustices, like as nurses and nurse leaders. And as a student, I assumed, I'm like, oh, well, you guys, this is your job. Like you're probably getting paid for this. But then I found out later that that was all voluntary on their part. I think being able to like learn from these individuals and their drive to obviously make this change and influence, and then to see also like students respond and like desire to know more and be involved. And how can I use my degree? How can I use my workspace in the future to, address these issues that we don't want to die down.
Yeah, I was curious what the other students in your cohort, how they responded.
I think it was obvious who desired to know more and who just kind of didn't. And I think that because I am Black and I wake up Black every day and having the nursing knowledge that I do, I can't ignore the injustices. I can't ignore the discrimination and the realities. Like it's not a choice for me.
Yeah.
Yet for so many people that were and still are around me, like in my current workspace and obviously in school, it is very much a choice. And that took like a toll.
There's a lot of rewards tied into white supremacy and leaning into the privilege and not disrupting the status quo and keeping that insulation closed and being silent.
Yeah.
Silence is this powerful mechanism. I would say those who are participating in allyship based on their desire to want to preserve the goodness in humanity, just as a heartfelt desire to be a part of something that's holistically healing for all of us, would say that there are ultimately more benefits in that choice.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you miss out on the relationships and the diversity and the experience of a full and vibrant reality with people who don't look like you.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, monoculture is really
boring.
Yeah, very boring. It's deficient. So when you graduate from nursing school, where do you go next? What's your first step into the career?
I graduated 2021 and I did my practicum and I just got hired on there. The first 6 months, I really thought I made a mistake though. I went to my husband in tears and I was like, why did I do this? This is a scam. This isn't what I signed up for. You learn all these things of quote unquote how to be a nurse and what that looks like. And so then I was super excited to start in a pretty intense critical care environment that does cardiac and you literally can't live right without your heart. And so it's really intense when your job is to help people maintain their heart function. And so I hated it the first 6 months. It was terrible. I was like, I don't think I can do this kind of nursing. This is not what I thought it was going to be. And I think the biggest thing that turned me off in that first 6 months when trying to learn to be a nurse was the mental and emotional toll that nursing took on. You're with people for 12 hours, 3 times a week, the worst days of their life. And they're typically the worst version of themselves. And you're trying to help and you're trying to intervene. I'm very much a people person and love to hear people's stories and interact. And I felt very much like, I don't know if I like people as much as I thought I would because people are really mean. And I'm at work crying because I feel like I'm being emotionally abused and bullied by this person that I'm trying to help. I think it was on the verge of clinical depression that first few months as a nurse.
Yeah, what you're describing makes sense. That's totally valid.
And unfortunately, that is a reality for a lot of people. In looking at the research and the data, and specifically for nurses of color, they're only stay in their profession for 2 years after they graduate is typical time in regards to inpatient kind of hospital spaces.
Wow.
Specifically, only 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
And then they leave. I was in the inpatient setting for 2 years and I was like, okay, I don't think I can do this. This isn't good for my health.
So tell me about being a Black nurse in a predominantly white state.
Because I'm a Black woman, I have a whole additional amount of emotional labor that I have to do just to get through my 12 hours that, Judy, Susie, Sam don't necessarily have that extra emotional labor. Experiencing microaggressions from literally everywhere during that 12 hours, during that work environment, workspace, macroaggressions like blatant racism.
Is there an experience that comes to mind?
Oh, there's so many. And it's interesting, again, because this is the worst day of people's lives. They're not the best selves, yet they feel that they still need to divulge their beliefs or put their beliefs on you. But then I think because of white supremacy and just racism being so embedded into people's experience and response that it just comes out wrong. There was a patient who was really, really sick and I was his nurse taking care of this person as the days went on and he got better and he was a little bit more mobile. He looks at me and he says, I want you to know that I'm a different person now. I cock my head, and in my head, I'm like, okay, that's kind of an odd thing to say, but people say the darndest things. And so he stands. I'm like, okay, let me help you tie your gown so that, your bum isn't out to the world. And I see what he's talking about. And my eyes go to this huge swastika on this man's permanently tattooed on this white man's back. And it takes me aback.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, I'm behind him. I feel like I'm in danger now. When I see this symbol, I feel like this fight or flight, my heart starts pumping oh my gosh, what do I do? But Marnasha, you're the nurse, so you can't do anything because you're responsible for this patient. I think it was hard for me in my response to him because I couldn't really voice my true thoughts, the hurt that I felt because what this man may have represented in a past life, or what he still represents, or because I think in the same term, like, well, I don't want you to judge me, but you may have been doing that these past 2 days.
Yeah. And what about your coworkers? Were you able to communicate what you were going through?
I think I told one coworker. It was a white coworker. I was like one of 2 Black employees, and their response was just kind of like, "That's ugly," or like,
right.
But I think like thinking,
it doesn't hit the same like culture.
My body like felt so unsafe and in danger and frightened, and you don't get compensated for that emotional labor, and it's just really unfortunate. And I think that adds to why the profession in itself isn't as diverse as it could be.
Right, 2 years in, and then they're out. So you come to a space where you realize that you want to put up some boundaries. So what were those boundaries that you engaged in?
When they train you at any new job, there's policies and protocols. If, this happens, then you do this. If this happens, then you do this. But when it comes to microaggressions, a lot of the times, or even macroaggressions, there's no protocol for that. There's no policy that protects me as a nurse in regard to how I respond to something like that. Even escalating it to when a patient becomes combative, right? When it comes to racism, there's no protocol, there's no policy. It's kind of like, oh, sorry, Marnasha, like figure it out on your own. And that's something that I found out very quickly.
Yeah.
Especially in regard to my name. So my name is spelled Marnasha. There's like one vowel. And a lot of the times people will say like Marnasha, Marnisha. They'll like get that middle A wrong, not only with my patients, but with the leadership at my facility and my coworkers, where people mispronouncing my name, even after I had worked there for 1.5 years. And so creating a boundary and like empowerment in myself to correct people. This is a proud Black girl moment. So I had this patient, and I go into her room and I always introduce myself. Hi, my name's Marnasha. I'm going to be your nurse. I'm going to spell my name up on the board, right? Like on the whiteboard. And this woman's first reaction was, well, that's unusual. And it was a response where I was like, what? My name's unusual. Okay. Yeah. I feel like it's one of those responses you just take a beat, at least for myself, where you're like, that's not really a compliment. And it kind of feels like an insult.
Right. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And I asked her, I said, what's unusual about it? And then she got really uncomfortable, and she just kind of stared. She's like, well, I've never heard it. I'm like, okay. I was not going to comfort her.
Right.
in her uncomfortability. And I just kind of let this patient sit in it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So is that a problem that it's unusual? Like, this is the name that I was given. Like, I'm proud that my mother was creative enough to give me this name.
Yeah.
I felt really proud of myself, because I think a lot of the times being a Black woman in predominantly white spaces, especially when it comes to my name, it's easy to like want to comfort people. I'm like, oh, no worries. Like my initial response for years has always been like, oh no, like it's okay. Like this is actually how you say it, or just kind of brush it off when people respond in a microaggression where it points out like, well, you're different, you're an other, and so is your name, because you're unusual.
Yeah.
You're not like us. And I'm going to point that out, because maybe they don't or do like it or whatever that may be, but definitely wasn't a compliment.
Right. I think that any sort of challenge required to accept a Black person, whether it's their name or their attitude or their personality, that anything that requires extra is not included in the experience of interacting with white folks. And they're going to let you know, like, oh, I'm stretching myself right now to say your name.
Oh, I'm uncomfortable now because here you are with this long, confusing name.
And it kills me because you're not experiencing racism. Like, you haven't even experienced the thing that is truly uncomfortable, that requires emotional, support, that is a detriment to maintain emotional wellness.
Yes.
That's not what you're experiencing right now. You're just experiencing the difference. Something outside of you.
Yeah. In this one moment.
Right. What you're saying kind of makes me think of the inverse of that in terms of what it feels like to care for Black patients and what it feels like to have that connection culturally.
Yeah.
How there can be some relief in feeling like we're here for each other in a space that is historically white. So I'm curious if there's any stories that have encouraged you in terms of interacting with Black patients.
Yes. I've lately, with my new kind of line of work, I've had a lot of joy in interacting with Black and African American patients on a regular basis. And luckily now working in outpatient, that is so great when I meet, older Black adults who I can relate to, and I can laugh and talk about our cultural experiences, and also listen to them when they're talking about their healthcare experiences. I had this Black man. He was like maybe in his 40s, high blood pressure. I think he was pre-diabetic, and he hadn't seen a doctor in like months. And in speaking with him, he is concerned about his blood pressure, obviously, but it's really hard with his job to get to the pharmacy, to set money aside to pay for his prescriptions, and he hasn't been sleeping very well. I don't know that he would have expressed that if I was, a nurse of a different race, or if I didn't sit down and like really take the time to listen to his concerns, and being able to take that back to the doctor and be like, hey, I understand we're worried about his blood pressure, but he's just trying to, make ends meet and get to work, but is unable to get to work because he can't sleep. And looking at this patient's profile, like he probably has obstructive sleep apnea. So it just was super encouraging in that setting, because I felt like this patient saw me, coming from the same background, and that helped motivate him to take ownership of his health.
With this new position and how wonderful it's been for you, is this a space that you think you'll find longevity in?
I do see longevity in just serving the underrepresented, predominantly speaking for Black and African Americans communities here in Portland and in Oregon as a whole.
So often I think Black folks have a distrust of the healthcare system and don't feel like they can be honest about what is happening in their life, because there is going to be some judgment about them. But when that's a part of your story as a Black person, it comes with so much more stigma, because racism dictates that what you don't have is because you're Black, not because the world is a difficult place to survive in general, and all kinds of people struggle to make ends meet. I don't think there's very much about the healthcare system that allows Black people vulnerability, especially as it becomes literally a danger to our lives. The morbidity rate of Black women who are pregnant, for example, where just processing the data around Black women being 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than their white counterparts.
Exactly. The space that I work now allows me to have the time and capacity to address the burdens of Black health and healthcare within our systems. And I do it on a voluntary basis in environments where I have the support to do that, right? Like with the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, I volunteer to do that work and to educate others, because I know I have the support of my colleagues and my mentors and my friends who are also share that same experience.
You've mentioned other ways that you found grounding and ways to support yourself. And I know that your faith is a big part of that.
Yes. I feel like my faith saves me a lot of mean words and things that I want to say out loud. I went to a workshop a few years ago with this author. Her name is Lisa Harper, and she writes about the biblical significance of Jesus's racial and community identity. We paralleled it. Jesus in his time would be a modern day Black man who was ostracized, who was condemned, who was brutally lynched publicly. And knowing that specifically within my community and the church that I go to, acknowledging racial injustice and to firmly believe that and be surrounded by people who can continue to encourage me. And because of my faith, I am given strength and capacity and wisdom to fight this good fight in regard to racial injustice. And it is just my job as a follower of him to do that in small ways that I can while I'm here walking this earth.
So many of us as humans look for stories and outlets and connections to ground our reality, especially when it becomes so difficult to live in it.
Yeah.
And as Black folks, we've had a difficult reality.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of times seems to be getting worse and not improving.
Yeah.
That we reach for the stories that are comforting or reflect similar experiences that our own and have some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. So
yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that. And, you know, I think that what you're saying, these values around reaching for a higher goodness can benefit the healthcare system. And I'm happy that you found a place that nourishes you.
I hope to stay in this kind of work because I think it really just does fulfill me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This has been absolutely lovely. We really appreciate your sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
How do we anchor ourselves in a world where the white dominant perspective often ignores or blatantly denies our reality? Marnasha talks about her faith and how the story of Jesus enduring persecution helps her find spiritual resiliency. I think about how gospel music carries with it this unbridled passion, this bellow of hope for the here and beyond. Whether the religion resonates with you or not, we cannot deny the spirit of the Black gospel church and how it has carried the souls of many, many Black people through the trenches of unspeakable abuse. The story Marnasha shared about caring for a man who had a giant swastika tattooed on his back really highlights the way nurses must remove their own judgment and maintain a neutral presence when offering care, even if the environment is not at all neutral, even if it feels threatening. It seems to me that one must have a very rooted foundation to navigate circumstances like this, maintain professionalism, and restore their own peace at night. How do you anchor yourself when facing societal harm or pressure? How do you connect with a deeper peace when you're confronted with something or someone that brings up a fear in you? One way that has always sustained the well-being of Black people is reaching out to each other. Community is a currency of protection, a guiding light through the storm. Allies can also support in the community. like Marnasha's instructors who spent unpaid hours facilitating connections for their students to institutions like the NAACP and making space to have harder conversations about racism. There is so much that is beyond our control when navigating systems and ideologies of oppression, and we are not alone. Even in a place as racially isolating as Oregon, we still have each other. We have music. We have stories and myths and ancestors and so much more. Thank you, listeners, for being in our community. Thank you, Marnasha, for sharing your truth. Black Care Matters is presented by the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, sponsored by the Oregon Center for Nursing, and was recorded at KBOO Studios here in Portland, Oregon. This episode was produced by Ida Hardin, with production support and mix mastering by Ramoy Phillip. Our executive producer and host, myself, Rashida Quinn. The Black Care Matters podcast website was designed by Brendan Quinn, with portrait art created by Ryan Alexander Tanner. Special thanks to Danae Hall of the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, Kelly Castanegro, and our team at KBOO, Jezaniah Hawthorne, Zoe Ezekiels, and Selena Flores. This podcast would not be possible without the generous grant from Oregon Center for Nursing. Thank you to our grant team, Rick Allgeier, Don Schoenthal, and Callie Giesler. And here's a special invite to all of you, our listeners. Please engage with what you hear and learn on Black Care Matters. Did listening to an episode remind you of a racialized experience you had in healthcare? Did it strengthen your commitment to anti-racism in your own workplace or community? Did it bring up questions about how you can better speak out against white supremacy culture? Please reach out with your questions and comments at blackcarematters.org/contact. We would love to feature our listeners' feedback on a special episode of Black Care Matters. Your voice matters. Listen to Black Care Matters wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, why don't you leave us a review? Your words really do help us reach a wider audience. It's been a pleasure sharing this with you. We'll have a new conversation for you next month. Until then, remember, Black care does matter. It's a matter of how we make those words count.